Hi, everybody. Welcome to our next session in the Inclusion 101 series for administrators. In this session, we're going to be looking at administrative look-fors in the inclusive school. My name is Johari Sykes-Ratliff.
And I'm Kerry Cormier.
And again, we welcome you to the LRC. This session is brought to you by the Learning Resource Center Network, which is an NJDOE Office of Special Education project. In the network, educators, leaders, and families of children with disabilities have access to various support services and professional development. And here are the 4 locations located throughout the state. Today, again, this PD is brought to you by the LRC-South and specifically the one located at Rowan University's College of Education. Today's agenda is going to start out with a self-assessment. We're going to shift into a conversation about identifying inclusive pedagogies and practices, and finally, setting inclusive goals. Norms for all LRC South sessions include using strength-based language and demonstrating a growth mindset, engaging in solution-oriented discussions with open minds, reflecting on what's shared and seeking clarification or support if needed. And then lastly, staying focused on the topic, actively listening to one another, and ensuring that all voices are heard. Our goals and objectives for this session is that by the end of this, administrators and educators will be able to identify key practices that you can implement, which will help to increase the inclusion of all students.
And so getting started, and we encourage self-assessment to help us get a sense of what actions we can take to become more inclusive. So we can consider our vision for inclusion. Is everyone on board? Who in our district can we rely on to help move this mission forward? Do all teachers, faculty, staff understand what our purpose is, what our goal is, and how we're moving forward? So really making sure that we're sharing our goal with everybody. We also encourage you to look at your district's data related to the least restrictive environment. How many students spend 80% or more of their day in general education? And then backwards mapping, right? If our goal is to get all students fully included, what looks like a reasonable number for us to aim for each year? It absolutely cannot be like we're just going to push all students in all at once. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for our teachers, for our students. We need to take actionable steps that move us forward little by little. And it might be a painful process sometimes. But again, just having everybody just push towards full inclusion right away doesn't set us up for success. And so that will lead to a lot of frustration on both students and families and educators. And so we want to make sure that people, again, take adequate steps, right? That we're increasing little by little every year. And so again, looking at our data and how do we get towards having students included 80% or more of the day? We also encourage you to analyze where your students live. Are students attending their neighborhood school? That is one of the tenets of inclusive education that we spoke about in the previous video in the series. And so if students are not attending their neighborhood school, well, how can we shift towards that? And what does that look like? And what, again, are the steps involved in making that happen? And then finally, analyzing your staff and resources. What's working? What great things are you already doing? And really making sure that you're adding to that list so that you're taking a strengths-based approach when reflecting on how you're doing as well. You know, not just taking a strengths-based approach to looking at students, but what can we celebrate? What are we doing that's working? And then what's missing to make more inclusion happen or to make it happen better? So really thinking about what do we need more of? And fully recognizing the constraints of education. Like there are so many things we wish we could do, but we know that we have a lot of limitations and a lot of barriers. So what are some of the things and what are some solution-oriented workarounds that can help us move towards inclusion? And so inclusion in action, like what does it look like? What are the steps that we take? So the first step that we can take to work towards inclusion is, again, like we just spoke about, is determining your vision, your values, your goals related to inclusive education. What is it that you're working towards? What's your objective? If this were to be a unit plan, like what would your objective be? What would be your essential questions, your enduring understandings? What are you moving towards? Our second step is to review our needs through service delivery mapping. Again, we spoke previously in the previous video about inclusion and special education being a service, not a place. So let's look at where do we have our educators? Where do we have our specialists located? And how can we make our schedules move more seamlessly so that students, again, can be with their same age peers for the majority of the day? And then step 3 is realigning our school structures to support inclusion. Can we have our OT and PT therapists push into classrooms? If a student is struggling with handwriting, can they go in? Can we coordinate their schedule so that they could go in during writing instruction so that it's real-time, meaningful help that a student is getting to improve their writing, right? If a student needs help with speech, can we have our speech and language pathologists push in during a time when there's going to be a discussion? So again, they're getting help on something in a real, actionable, tangible way of like, here's a real-time scenario where this child can have some support and assistance. And so can we build some of those structures so that they're not getting pulled out, working on a skill in isolation, and then having a hard time transitioning that skill from an isolated environment into a real-time environment where they need to utilize the skill. So those are some of the actions we can take. We can also, again, as we work towards inclusion, look at creating co-teaching teams and instructional supports. So can we move, so instead of having a special education teacher pulling students out, can we just have them assigned to that classroom where they're in that classroom full time throughout the day? So that way everybody is working in conjunction. Again, we're never alone on this mission towards inclusive education. So how can we build in more co-teaching and more collaboration so that people don't feel like they're doing this in isolation? Step 5, can we provide PD on inclusive pedagogies and practices? Again, you're not working on this in isolation. There are supports out there for you. Let's bring those supports in. Let's continue our learning. There are plenty of things that Johari and I don't know, like let's keep learning. Let's keep that curiosity alive. That's something we want for our students to have and be curious. It's something that we should model as adults. And so let's bring in some PD on inclusive pedagogy. And then finally, step 6, just keeping a temperature check, right? Keeping a pulse. How are things going? So we're going to monitor our work towards inclusion. We're going to adjust as needed, and we are absolutely going to celebrate our growing culture of belonging. Again, really thinking about like what makes our schools and our districts so wonderful and fabulous and celebrating that and doing more of that, right? Thinking about who is in our community and getting that constant feedback from families, from students, from teachers, from staff, having everybody have a say, looking at our assessment and getting a good sense of where we're at and where we're moving and what we might need to tweak and readjust on. And so again, with that inclusive pedagogy, ways we can support inclusive learning communities, we absolutely can presume competence. All students can learn, they will learn, and they are actively learning. We just need to tweak our assessments, right? Are we meaningfully assessing students? But we absolutely believe that any student, regardless of their label, can learn. They will learn and they are learning. We are going to universally design and be culturally responsive in our approaches to teaching. We're going to honor students where they're at and tailor our instruction and our services to students to meet those needs in a way that is equitable and accessible for them. We're going to embed support services. Like I said, can we have our specialists pushing in so that students aren't working on skills in isolation? And recognizing that there might be some times where students do need to work in isolation, but it's not the majority of the time. That most every day a student is having somebody push in and come to them rather than the student having to go seek that support. And that we are being mindful of modifications, accommodations, and adaptations, and we are creative in what we're offering students. And we are recognizing a wide array of the ways that students can be supported. We can think about flexible seating. We can think about fidgets, which I'm always using down below, right? Like we can fidget. It's okay, right? And thinking about our modifications and adaptations. And if it's something that the student needs, And we might be hesitant because it might be distracting to us. Who gets the benefit? And so having those hard conversations and being honest with ourselves and thinking about, does the student need this? And is it in an effort to help them? Or is it something that I need to think about as an educator? And finally, thinking about our collaboration, communication, and co-teaching. We really want to be mindful of the language that we use every day. Do we have your students? Do we have my students? Or do we have our students? Right? And that we take ownership of the entire student body, that everybody knows everybody, right? And everybody feels welcome in any space or classroom. We want to be mindful of having students all in one particular hallway, right? If we have self-contained classrooms, where are they, right? When I was a special education teacher, my self-contained classroom as the English teacher was next door to the general education classroom. It wasn't separate. It wasn't down its own hallway. We were together. And again, that fostered that collaboration between teachers and spaces. So these are all things that we work on. You can work on one of these action items, or you can work on one of them at a time. You can try to do all of them all at once, but again, being realistic. It is a process that does take time. And just as long as we know that we're making progress, then that's what we're looking for.
And so kind of just going along with what Kerry is saying, it's important at this point to start setting goals for inclusion. She just said be realistic, and that's really the key word in this whole process. You want to really consider first, what is your vision? Your service delivery mapping is something that you want to look at in order to really get a sense of the state of inclusion as it currently is or is not being implemented within your district or within your school. After you have that, I think that would help to set the tone for, again, being realistic and saying, this is what I know we need to do. If it's like we are so far behind, we have such a way to go, then we know we might start out with some small goals, or we might say, in looking at my service delivery mapping, there's some tweaks that can happen where we can get to this. So we can do these little minor changes. But if you have your service delivery mapping, you look at your vision, and you have a strong understanding of where you stand in including all children in your program, you then can look at where you're going to go and what the goals are going to look like as you move forward. Second, consider your district and the school strengths, and then the areas of growth that are needed as it relates to those inclusive practices. Once you have that, like I just said, once you look at all of these documents and tools that you have, then you're going to be able to identify 2 or 3 goals, whether it be short-term or long-term or a combination of both, that you're going to use to help you strive for um, whatever goals you have set in order to increase inclusion within your school or your district. And then these are goals that you can embed in your action plans. Of course, as a former administrator myself, I'd identify staff that I knew would be able to support me in leading some committee work to really look at the goal that I'm like trying to set. And now how can we make this actionable for our staff? How can our staff have a part of this? Pull in students so everyone's voice is a part of the conversation. And so at that point, it's important to utilize who you have on your team and who you have confidence in that can really make this come to life. So key takeaways today are conducting the self-assessment, which we did, and utilizing that service delivery mapping. That is going to be so helpful for you to get an understanding on where to start moving the needle on inclusion within your district and or school. Another thing we really want you to take away from this is that there are so many factors that go into inclusive practices, and it impacts all levels of the school community. And then lastly, we would love if you took away from this that you're going to leave here and set 2 to 3 goals every year that's going to help your school community or district community move forward towards more inclusive practices being implemented at the school level. We want to thank you for joining us today. You can stay connected by scanning this QR code. And here are our references that we use. Please feel free to utilize them as you continue to research this topic. And here are our social media networks, which are connected to the LRC South, and the social media for NJDOE is here, and our Office of Commissioner email if you need to connect with them. Again, we thank you and have a wonderful day.